Hello, everyone. Welcome to August edition of Kubernetes Upstream Mentors on Demand. We call this show Meet Our Contributors. It's technically a very early circus for us on the Pacific Coast here, not for Nikita, though. Nikita, what time is it near you?
8 p.m.
All right, so Nikita is having her post-dinner snack with us, and I'm so glad that everybody could join us today. For those who are first-timers, one, welcome, but two, let me give you some context as to what the show is all about. So people always ask us, can I have a mentor to Upstream? And mentors, unfortunately, are few and far between based on time and all kinds of other open source time-related activities. So we're here once a month giving anyone advice who says, hey, I would love a mentor. Whether you are new, whether you've been on the project for 4 years, whatever it is, we'll answer your questions, whether it's how do you manage your time with open source projects, all the way to why is my test flagging? We'll take it all. We might not know it all, but we will definitely get you the resources to do it. So how do you ask us questions? We hang out in a Slack channel on the Kubernetes Slack. If you don't have an invite, that's slack.k8s.io for that. And grab that invite there. The channel is Meet Our Contributors. And if you would like to remain anonymous, you can feel free to direct message me on Slack, which is more than appropriate. We get about 60% of the questions that way. And feel free to DM me. My name is Paris. You see that on your screen right now, same display name in Slack. We already have a couple questions queued up for today, but let's talk about some rules. First things first, we have a code of conduct that we abide by that is through the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. This is TLDR, please be excellent to each other. So whether you are asking a question on Slack or you are having fun with us on Twitter today, just please take note that be awesome to each other. And any of our other contributors can also feel free to help us out in the feel free to help us out on and answer questions in the Meet Our Contributors Slack channel. That would be awesome. All right, and really quick announcement. The Kubernetes Contributors Summit is actually going to be taking place on November 17th and 18th. This is a save the date. So if you do upstream contributing for the project and interested in hanging out with us, doing some unconferences and other really awesome things, check the Kubernetes dev mailing list for save the dates and updates as we progress. Registration is going to be open in September. That's really the only update I had today for announcements. So let's get right into the show and do some intros. Nikita, why don't you go first? Tell us who you are and why you're here.
Sure. So I am Nikita. I work as a software engineer at a German startup called Heeta, but I work remotely from India. In Kubernetes Upstream land, I am the technical lead, one of the technical leads for SIG contributor experience. I'm on the GitHub admin team, so that's the team which has owner privileges across all Kubernetes orgs. And well, what else? I'm also involved in like some other SIGs, like SIG testing, SIG release, SIG API machinery.
All the SIGs.
We've got all. And then maintain some projects like Publishing Bot, which is like the bot responsible for syncing code between the main Kubernetes repo and other repos like API machinery, Client Go. And I also do Client Go releases. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
And if you're out there wondering what a SIG is, don't you worry. We're going to get into that in a second. Ilana, what's up with you?
Well, I work at Red Hat as a principal site reliability engineer. I'm currently a team lead on the OpenShift on Azure, or the Azure Red Hat OpenShift team. So we run OpenShift, which is Red Hat's downstream Kubernetes distribution, as a managed service on Azure, which is kind of fun. In terms of Kubernetes upstream, I've been involved in SIG instrumentation for a little over a year. working on metrics usability and performance of various metrics collection things, that kind of thing. And I only recently became a project member, not really realizing that was something that I could do. I'm mostly involved in open source, actually. Kubernetes is only one of the projects that I work on. I am involved in Debian as a developer as well, where I maintain closure packages. I used to be involved with the Python Packaging Authority and many other sorts of things like that.
I really wanted to read your Twitter bio today, actually. To be honest, it's one of the best Twitter bios that I've seen. Hold on, I'm gonna get it out if that's okay with you, because I think it's freaking awesome. And I wanted to even say it in like a serious voice. It's like Queen of Debian Closure, Empress of Symbol Versioning, Conqueress of ABIs, Director, Open Source Org, Tree, Red Hat, Partition Tolerant, Available, and Not Consistent. Awesome.
Oh yeah, I'm also one of the directors of the board at the Open Source Initiative.
Yes, and y'all are awesome. And I'm going to actually ask you some questions about that later, if that's cool.
Sure.
But otherwise, awesome. And then Jeff cannot talk. He is streaming right now. Jeff, why don't you get? Okay, cool. Say Jeff. Say who you are.
I'm Jeff. I work at the University of Michigan. I am a research database administrator, which is not really descriptive of what my day job actually is. But in terms of Kubernetes, I am a chair on SIG UI, so the Kubernetes dashboard. I help out with Contribex doing things like streaming, and I am a Slack admin and a moderator on YouTube, thus the streaming, and I'm on the release team for 1.16.
Yes, Jeff is making this work today. So if our stream sounds weird, blame Jeff. Just kidding. Don't blame anyone. Blameless retros. Anyway. And last, I am Paris. I'm your host today. I work at Google and I do fun stuff like this all the time. It's wonderful. I try to make sure that our lovely Kubernetes project here has contributors who are happy and wonderful and doing cartwheels. So that's it. We're going to get into our very first question. And it is from Scott on Slack in my DMs. And Scott is asking, so Scott wants to contribute code to the project. He has not contributed any code thus far. Wants to know, could you point me in the general direction of projects for Golang newbies? And what's been your experience with getting started?
Nikita, do you want to jump into that one or want me to take that?
You can take that. That's fine. I'll add stuff later on.
So Kubernetes is the first Golang project that I contributed to. I would say I've been like writing Go sort of on and off for just a few months, honestly. So I think it's like a pretty friendly project in order to sort of learn the language. There's this tutorial called the Tour of Go, which you can install on your computer or play around with in a sandbox online in order to sort of get up to speed on language constructs. But I mean, you don't have to like write this massive, big, huge feature in order to like get in and start with code contributions. My first PR to the project was to Kubernetes/Kubernetes. And specifically just like working with Prometheus labels. So it was effectively like a 2 or 3 line change. And now the follow up to that is removing some Prometheus labels. So also like a 3-line change. There are also lots of projects that are owned by the various SIGs that you could potentially get involved in if those seem a little bit less intimidating than trying to run all of the massive test suite for the main Kubernetes project and that kind of thing. I believe that there's probably also non-Golang projects in some of the SIGs, but I'm not familiar with those specifically because most of them in SIG instrumentation are written in Go. But yeah, it's a very friendly environment, I think, to like try to learn a new language, and because you get to go look through this massive, big new code base, it kind of gives you an idea of like what does idiomatic Go look like. So I don't think that you have to have it all figured out before you jump in. In terms of finding a project, I would recommend like get involved in the stuff that you care about. Don't just be like, I have decided that SIG API machinery sounds cool and I want to get involved in that. Because it may turn out that, I mean, I'm sure that they are wonderful people and you'll have a great time there. But if you're like, I don't even know what that is, but I'm going to like show up and be like, mentor me, tell me how to get involved. But I don't know anything about you and I don't really care. I just want to get involved. They might be like, well, we don't really know how to help you. Like, what are you interested in? And so specifically, when I got involved in the project, I specifically got involved with SIG instrumentation because I was working at a company with these really large on-premise clusters. We didn't have any of this cloud stuff. We were all running upstream code. I needed to instrument things, and I'm just kind of like, this seems like the Wild West out here. Like, I guess maybe vendors have solved this problem for everyone else because the open source ecosystem isn't looking really great. And so I thought, oh, okay, how do I figure that out? So I went and looked through the list of SIGs and I'm like, okay, there's a SIG instrumentation. Maybe I'll like try to show up to their meetings and ask them some questions. Like, why is this thing this way? This doesn't make any sense to me. And so I did. And then I filed some bugs. And then some people fixed some of the bugs that I filed, which was exciting. And then I fixed some of the bugs that I filed, which was also exciting, and kind of went from there.
That was a really great answer, by the way. For those that are just joining us, we have quite a few people that are just joining us live right now. Thank you for joining the August edition of Meet Our Contributors. We are in the middle of answering a question from someone who is a newbie to Golang, wants to start contributing to the project and wanted to get some on-ramp advice. Nikita, what about you? Anything that was missing there? It sounded pretty good. Pretty good response.
It was,
what about
it was perfect.
Yeah, what about your personal experience?
I would add like a couple more points. So we have like lots of issues in the Kubernetes repo, which are like Golang fixes. So Golang is a tool which helps in like linting and checking if the Go files are following some format. So that can help in like fixing, like, so you just basically need to run a script and it will tell you what things to change. So that's also like helpful in understanding how the Go file is structured or what are the like ways in which you are supposed to structure your Go files. So that's like a very smooth introduction to Go, I would say. And you don't actually have to do Go too. So there were like lots of contributors who reached out to me and they were like, I don't know Go, what do I do? Most of them, I don't know if it's like always this way, but most of them usually are into Python. So I usually point them out to the Kubernetes client/Python repo, if I'm right about the repo name. So there are lots of repos. Oh, yay. So there are lots of repos in the Kubernetes /client org. So there's Python, there's JavaScript, TypeScript, and there's even Perl. I don't know how a Perl client looks like. But so all of these are Kubernetes clients, and the Python client is, as far as I know, the most active one. So if you're interested, to reach out to that. They hang out in Kubernetes client channel, I guess. And they also have like a public triage call where they triage issues. So I think that's a really good place to understand what's going on in that repo and figure out places to contribute.
Yeah, shout outs to our SIGs who do public live triage. Yay, API machinery. That is a great way to get involved. If you're interested in a SIG, which you're like, what's a SIG, Paris? SIG is a special interest group. It's how we divide and conquer this project. It's how people get work done. They own individual, they own different parts of our code base. And that's how you can kind of get the, where am I interested in and what am I interested in from, because each one has a certain interest. We did have a question in the Slack channel about the announcement. And for those that are just joining, the announcement was that we are doing a contributor summit in San Diego right before KubeCon, November 17th and 18th. Folks wanted to know a little bit more about that. What does that mean? That means that we are doing two different kinds of shows. One show is for new contributors, who are interested, just like a lot of you right now that are asking questions, in doing a hands-on intensive workshop in landing your first PR. So that is an awesome thing that we've been doing now for 4 or 5 KubeCons, and we've been onboarding several hundred contributors that way, which is amazing. And then we will have an opportunity for over 300 current active contributors to do M conferences, other kinds of workshops like writing KEPs, which is a Kubernetes enhancement proposals, think features. And it's going to be a really good time. We also have a celebration the night before where we all get together and have a social. And Nikita is already excited about that. That is one of my favorite parts of the week, where we all just get to hang out. This is a humongous distributed team. If you want to put it from a numbers perspective, 3,000 committers. That's committers, and then 31,000 contributors. These are people that are helping us triage on GitHub, doing commits, doing PRs, etc. So we have a humongous contributor base, and all of us want to hang out with each other, which is awesome. All right.
I actually have a question about
Yes.
that for you, Paris.
Yes.
Can people still volunteer for the Contributor Summit? And if, like, when should they sign up?
Yeah, so volunteers, we have a team of 25 volunteers, y'all. It's an amazing team, and we've actually modeled it in a very similar fashion as we did with the release team, where they have shadows so that it can be a sustainable event for us go forward. And we are not open for volunteer opportunities right now. However, we will most likely closer to the event. We're going to have a lot of day of opportunities and things like that come along. And you can find out about those opportunities on the Kubernetes developer, which is synonymous for contributor mailing list. So if you're not on that, that's kubernetes-dev@googlegroups.com. Get on that for all things upstream news. And then as far as registration is concerned, the reg will also go out there, and that will be in the beginning of September. And registration is free, FYI. All right. And then it looks like we have in Slack, TyAG. And then we also have a +1 on that question as well. What's the advice for someone starting out when good new issues or good first issues are not available or already picked by others? Kubernetes is going to be their first involvement with open source. So we got a sort of a double dip question there. We've got a newcomer to open source, and then also what do they do when there's no good first issues?
Okay, I can start if that's okay. So usually that shouldn't be the case on repos, because we want, like, most repos should have good first issues, but I know that it's still the case that good first issues are sort of rare, and as soon as an issue is tagged as a good first issue, they're taken up by someone else. We also have another label called as help wanted. It's kind of synonymous with this, but it's kind of like a step 2 after good first issue. So if that's taken up, the next step would be to look into the help wanted label. And if you also, like, don't find a help wanted label, what I would usually do is go to the Slack channel for that SIG or the project that you're working on, and like ping some maintainers or ping some approvers and tell them that you're interested in contributing. One thing that I usually find helpful when someone asks me that question is talk a little bit about yourself, talk a little bit about what you already know, so that we come to know, like, where you're starting out from. So it's not like completely random, and I can sort of tell you the next steps. Also, one thing that's helpful is if you've already done some research, that you've just, like, gone through the documentation or just gone through the existing issues, and you can probably, like, just give us an introduction about what you've already read or what you've already done, so that I think it's easier for us to, like, tell you. Also attend meetings if you can. I know they're at like odd times. Sometimes like I'm from India and sometimes it's like at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. So I don't attend them. So if you can attend meetings, it's a good place to understand what are the current topics that are going on in the SIG and the current concerns so that you can jump up in those opportunities. Sometimes SIGs also like put out the call for volunteers there. Meeting notes are a good place to figure out if you aren't able to attend meetings. I mostly live my life on meeting notes, so they work pretty well.
YouTube recordings too, for folks that are like, you know, that might not be able to jump in right away, that still kind of want to see like what's up to. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's cool. Yeah, definitely YouTube. I kind of like listen to them on 2x speed, so that helps.
No, and that's great. Like that's what it's that's exactly what it's there for, right?
Yeah.
You thought Paris talked fast now.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Just wait.
Yeah, I guess that's sort of what's coming to my mind right now. Do you want to add something, Ilana?
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I sort of want to address is there's often, I find this like idea in these larger and active projects, like everything is done already. Like there's not really a good first place to start. Like, you know, there's these big companies, they all have these big contributors who know what they're doing. And like, I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know where to jump in. And all the good first issues are taken or something like that. Like, how could I possibly get involved? And it's very intimidating. But I think there's like a key thing to note, which is that it's not evenly distributed in that sense. So like there are a lot of different SIGs that govern the project, and they're all of different sizes and different levels of activity. And some of them are going to be easier to get involved in than others. So for example, I got involved in SIG instrumentation, and it's a pretty small SIG. It has a few active members. It meets bi-weekly. There's not like a huge number of PRs that we get requested to review, that kind of thing. But if you compare that to a SIG like SIG Node, which owns like the whole kubelet, they meet weekly, they have these massive meetings, they're very, very active. And there's lots and lots of folks involved, like that might be a little bit more intimidating to sort of jump in. It's going to be harder to find mentorship resources, especially if you're not really sure where you want to get involved. So my advice there would be try to find the pockets of the project that you're interested in and that maybe aren't necessarily like the path that everybody else is going down if you want to be able to make an effective contribution, because those smaller SIGs that don't get as much interest are going to be better able to help you contribute.
That was awesome. That was great question or great answers. I'm sorry. Yeah, I feel like there's just tons of ways to get involved in this project. And even if you like, even to the Golang question, I feel like it's much easier when you get in and see how the SIG, or special interest group, is run and like kind of what their norms are. And then it's going to be so easy for someone to say, oh, they don't have this, or something along those lines. I feel like I was sort of a fly on the wall to SIGs for a minute. It was kind of this like low stress barrier to entry, where I wasn't necessarily saying I was going to do anything or making any commitments. It was just, let me see how this thing works. And then after that, you kind of go, okay, I think I can do this. And then all of a sudden you're doing more and more. I think that's a good approach. So in the Slack channel, we had someone ask about a Kubernetes SIG project, KubeFed specifically. They had someone answer their question, but I actually want to take this question for others who are listening that might also benefit from it, which is, hey, I found something that I want to contribute to. So in this case, this person is saying, hey, KubeFed looks really fun, looks really cool. How do I find out who owns it? How do I find out what SIG it belongs to? How do I contact these people to like get things done? What are some tips there? So for like parts of the code base that you find that you might need further explanations on, give some folks some tips that way.
So one thing is for like finding the Slack channel for like this particular question. I don't know if it's mentioned in this project's README, but so all READMEs have one section where it says communication, contribution, and support. And it mentions the Slack channel that you could join. So I usually end up creating new repos as part of the GitHub admin team. And as part of that, I usually add a Slack channel. So if it if the repo was formed before the GitHub admin team was formed, chances are that the repo might not have a Slack channel mentioned in there. But otherwise it should have. Another way to like find out which SIG owns a particular repo is by going to the Kubernetes -community repo and then just searching it like in that repo, and it will like that. So all repos are mentioned are owned by a particular SIG. So like every repo must be owned by a particular SIG. So and all SIGs have a README file which list out the subprojects that the SIG owns and all the repos that it owns. So you'll find in one of those SIG READMEs, like the repo name would be mentioned there. So that's also kind of helpful to understand which SIG owns it. The other thing is to like find out if who are the particular individuals who own repo is the owner's files at the root of the repo. So owner's files are those files which mention if like who are the maintainers for that and who can approve or review changes to that code base. And so you can look at the usernames. Those are GitHub usernames mentioned in the owner's files, and you can sort of ping them on Slack. The usernames usually correlate, but sometimes you might have trouble finding them. And the other thing that I usually do to figure out who actually owns that piece of code is look at the history of that file. So whenever you open a file on GitHub, you'll find a history button on the top right. And you can actually see who has made the most number of commits to that file or who has recently changed that file. So you can probably reach out to them or just ask them for a review or things like that. So I find that more useful because sometimes the people listed in the owner's files might have touched that or made big changes to that code base maybe 2 years ago, but recently someone else has changed it and they probably have much more idea about that code base today. So
yeah, I also want to mention, Paris, could you go and click on a git blame in a file too? I use git blame a lot because frequently you'll have like this 200 line like file of code or something like that, and lots of different people have changed it. This one's quite old, it looks like, so those folks aren't even on GitHub. But so one of the like handy things about that, this might not be the best example, but one of the handy things about this is that when you're in this view, you can see who changed an exact line of code. You can click on that commit for that particular line of code. You can see all of the context of what they were changing when they made that change. And GitHub will even like link you back to the original pull request that like generated that change. So I don't know, Paris, you want to just like pick one? Sure, looks great. So yeah, we can see like this is like the whole commit, all of the context, and we can see that there's the pull request was 80125, and this change made it into the 116 alpha 2 release, which you can see at the top in the blue bar. Yeah, on the top left. Not that one, up like one more inch. More.
Above Stefan's
yeah,
picture.
There, yes. Yeah, so that this particular change hit the master branch from that particular pull request, and that managed to end up in whichever releases. This is really handy if you're like, when was this feature introduced? How many releases has this been in? Like, oh, I guess that was introduced in 114 or 115 or whatever.
I also like use the blame feature on GitHub for understanding a particular piece of the code. So like if I'm reading a file, trying to understand it better, and there's something I come across which doesn't make sense to me, so I usually like blame it on GitHub and then check out the pull request. And the pull request usually has way more context than maybe the commit message or even the comments on the file.
Yeah, unfortunately, not everybody writes the most descriptive commit messages. So the pull requests often will, but they won't just give you the context around that because there's like a required PR template. Like you'll see in like the first message of the PR, like this is the issue that this is fixing. These are any caps that are related to this, and so on and so forth.
We did briefly say what a KEP was before. What's a KEP for folks that don't know what a KEP is?
It's a Kubernetes enhancement proposal. And it's basically where folks announce saying, I want to make this big change that's going to affect a lot of people. We should talk about that and get some community buy-in before we go and break everyone. So I'm a co-author of a KEP wherein I was like, let's break everybody's metrics because they don't make a lot of sense right now.
That seems purposeful. Very awesome. How could people get involved in that KEP? Is it still open? Or is it at what stage is it?
That particular KEP, I think it's still an implementable because I'm still finishing up. Like, for example, that one, some of these KEPs take a long time to implement. So for example, one of the things that I, like my sort of mission in this KEP was to fix the fact that we had all these Prometheus labels on time series that you couldn't do joins on because they were different. So there was like the standard instrumentation guidelines that specified, you know, you should call this label pod and this label container and so on and so forth. But for whatever reason, CAdvisor was using pod underscore name and container underscore name. And so if you wanted to do a join on those metrics, you couldn't do it. You'd have to like relabel them first, which would result in these really ugly, messy queries or a bunch of relabeling logic you'd have to do in your Prometheus or like, it was kind of a mess. So I said, okay, let's fix the labels. But you can't just like go and be like, hey, everybody, you know those like nice container metrics labels that you're relying on for all of your queries and all of your dashboards? I'm just getting rid of those. So instead what you do in like a proposal like this is you say, okay, here is like what I want to change these to. Suggested as part of this larger KEP, which involved a bunch of breaking changes. We want to rename these to match the instrumentation guidelines. And in order to do that, we're going to deprecate the old labels and we're going to have both sets for a couple of releases. So you have time to switch over, that your queries don't immediately break. But then at some point, we're going to get rid of them. And then that will be a breaking change. And you have to switch by that point when you upgrade or else it's not going to work. So previously, I think in the 114 release, we got the new labels in. And now currently for the 116 release, I'm working on removing the old labels. So that way people had 114 and 115 to switch over. And then in 116, they've got to use the new thing.
What's been the hardest part about working with the KEP, or working on the KEP rather?
I mean, it was pretty straightforward. I guess the SIG sort of collaborated in a Google Doc sort of all together because there were a lot of different breaking changes that went in. And so we met and like, you know, discussed it in a couple of meetings. And then the SIG lead sort of proposed it. So it was pretty straightforward. And then I guess at KubeCon North America last year, that was when we went and like actually went and put it in the implementable state. So we could actually go and make all these various changes.
That sounds like amazing community collaboration right there. That was awesome. Testimonial. Jeff, you had a question.
Not so much a question, more of a comment along with the KEPs. So for Kubernetes, we tend to release every quarter, or we strive to, and every release team actually tracks the enhancements that are going into that release via the KEPs. And the fact that your instrumentation metrics thing is in the 116 release just made me want to bring that up as well. KEPs help us track that as well.
Sincerely, the 116 team representative on the call right now.
The 116 release lead Shadow, one of three.
Look at you. So that means you're on the hook next time, huh? Or the next two. That would be 118.
Maybe. I don't know which one I may lead, if any. There are a lot of shadows right now. So I'm just helping out.
Lots of volunteers vying to be release lead. That's like, wow. Usually like in other projects, you have to like tie people down and bait people. So that's awesome. So way to go, release team there for getting those shadows up and running. All right.
I have a follow-up question, if that's okay.
Go shoot.
So I had written a design proposal. It was like the term that we used before caps were a thing, and that required a lot of time. So I'm curious what you think, Alana and Jeff, both of you, what do you think are the required or the average time commitment for someone who wants to write a cap?
So I wrote a cap for the release notes website, which I don't know if anyone has seen. If someone can drop a link in the chat for an example, but removing all the changelog entries from the changelog.md per release and put it in a website so we can search and filter it. Seems like better usability. I wrote a cap for that because it was a user-facing change, so you should write a cap. That took me 2 hours. And that was like me nitpicking my own stuff and then sending it over to a friend. Hey, does this look good? But that was also, to me, a fairly straightforward, we are doing X and then moving it to Y. So I don't know for a more complicated cap like the metrics one, or pull some other complicated one.
I'd say that it's the metrics overhaul. That first one is the one that I was a co-author on. So this is like a pretty long cap. And it took like, I would say like, I don't know, maybe a month or two iterating on in order to like have this fully written. But it really depends, like, right? Like as Jeff was saying, you know, you could have like, this is my very small thing. And not like with this, which is like literally like, here is a bucket list of like all of the things that we want to fix and break at the same time kind of thing. So there's a template that you can fill out, and like if it's a small non-controversial thing, I imagine it, you know, a couple of hours seems like totally reasonable to me. If it's something that you need to shop around, get community buy-in, get lots of feedback on, it's changing a lot of different things. If it spans multiple SIGs, that's going to take a lot longer. That might even take multiple releases to get sign off on.
Absolutely. And the one thing I didn't take into account, like the time spent in side conversations with other SIGs or, you know, stakeholders beforehand. If you do that, it's like 4 hours.
I have actually, there was a question in my DMs that I'll ask now that's related, which is, why is everything on this project either so slow or so fast? And that's kind of what we were talking about here, where it's either like for the caps, like sometimes you have to stick around for a while, but then other things, it seems like it's going so fast. Talk about a little bit about about your time management too. That's what I'm also curious about, how you all manage your time in this kind of an environment of fast, slow, and what kind of things go slower, and what other things do you feel like go fast? For some advice and tips for folks out there who are like, whoa.
I don't know. I don't feel like anything in Kubernetes goes that fast. Maybe it's the stuff that I'm working on because it's user facing. It took me like 6 months or something like that. It's from sort of like, I am interested in contributing to get like a 3-line PR merged. And I think it took like 4 months of that PR being up. Although granted, the cap I think had not actually been out there and approved in order for it to get merged. So that was a little bit part of it. And then fighting with flaky tests and, you know, the whole experience there. But I don't know. I think for me, like, because it's sort of like not my primary like function of my day job, but rather sort of just like stuff that I do kind of in the background. I'm not like super impatient. And so I'm like okay with things taking like sort of a long time to happen. I'm used to such things taking long times to happen. Like I used to do a bunch of work for the Python Packaging Authority, and you know it would take like years to get a PEP approved. Not because like it took a really long time to get the PEP approved, but because someone had to go volunteer and do the work. And that would take a long time because it was all very technically challenging, and someone basically had to find the hours to do it. And then like, you know, the implementation phase again would take a long time, and that was very volunteer limited. Kubernetes at least tends to have a lot more like full-time paid contributors, so stuff gets done. People's jobs are working on Kubernetes full-time, so they tend to be pretty responsive. I'm currently like in the situation where I've got like this small PR that's like the follow-up to my other small PR, and it's been up for like 2 months. And it's been up for like 2 months, and it's been up for like 2 months. And it's been up for like 2 months, and it's been up for like 2 months. And it's been up for like 2 months, and it's been up for like 2 months. And it's been up for like 2 months, and it's been up for like 2 months. And it's been up for like 2 months, and it's been up for like 2 months. And it's been up for like 2 months, and it's been up for like 2 months. And it's been up for like 2 months, and it's been up for like 2 months. And it's been up for like 2 months, and it's been up for like 2 months. And it's been up for like 2 months, and it's been up for like 2 months. And it's been up for like 2 months, and it's been up for like 2 months. And it's been up for like 2 months, and it's been up for like 2 months. And it's been up for like 2 months, and it's been up for like 2 months. And it's been up for a few weeks, and it's like I have to track down 3 different approvers because I have to update the label on a test which got missed previously or got added in between releases or something like that. And nobody from that SIG is like around. And so maybe I have to go to their SIG meeting and be like, hey, look at this thing, show up. Because I've already done this with SIG Node, and even then it's kind of like, well, we're waiting on like SIG testing to like sign off on this like test thing before we're going to put our approval on it, and it can take time.
Yeah.
Be patient.
I wonder if sometimes I wonder if we get this like fast slow, because I mean our Venn diagram of contributors is mostly all users. I mean it's hard to, I think, contribute to Kubernetes without having touched it, but I'm wondering if it's because like they see on like the user end it's just so fast, there's just so many new features coming out, so it's like hard to, I guess, stay abreast that way. But then you're also like slow trying to make change on the contributor side. So I'm wondering if that's kind of where this like notion of like fast, slow comes from, is like kind of being both of those personas, right?
Yeah, it's fast in aggregate, but for like each individual feature, they're probably moving through pretty slowly.
Yes, exactly. So how do you manage your time? Right? Like, so both of you said you have full-time jobs. So all of us have full-time jobs. How are you managing throughout this? Like, so you've got caps going on, which are going to be slow. And then you know that you're going to need to stick around for 6 months to a year. And then you probably have some other smaller things going on in other areas of your life. Like, how are you managing?
Yeah, I guess it kind of waxes and wanes. Like, there's a bunch of different open source projects that I contribute to. Probably the one that I'm spending the bulk of my time on is like not a coding thing, but helping out with, I mean, I'm a member of the board of the open source initiative. So I have a bunch of board responsibilities as a director there. And so that takes a bunch of time. And then Kubernetes takes some amount of time. And so I kind of just budget with like the approval and support of my management, like during my sort of day job, 40 hours a week, 20% time. For I'm going to spend this time on upstream open source stuff, whether that's the open source initiative, whether that's Kubernetes. Obviously, Kubernetes stuff is more directly relevant to my day job. So that stuff, you know, if I need like a little bit more time, I can say, hey, I need to do this thing, and it affects these other teams at work, and then it's, you know, usually not a problem to get that time allocated. My last job was much more challenging because you know, I was working at like a financial company, you know, basically a Kubernetes end user. And so it was less easy to justify to management like this, you know, we weren't selling Kubernetes as a service or something like that. It was less easy to justify like I want to work on this as like part of my day job, and this is going to benefit us, because those timeframes were so slow for turnaround. Like I'm like, yeah, I'll get this in and it'll be in like the 1.14 release, and like we're back on like, you know, some older release, and we know it's going to be like 8 months or a year or something before we actually see any of those changes. Yeah, I don't know. I allocate such and such amount of time, and if it was taking too much time, I push back, I think, a little bit, because you know, you want to have a life outside of work and these things.
I couldn't get to my mute button fast enough to say amen. Like, so
like if this is taking more than 40 hours a week, and it has, like, when at my last job, you know, I had too many job responsibilities and not enough time to spend on upstream stuff because I couldn't get the time allocated at work. I said, okay, guess I'm not doing upstream stuff right now. And that was fine. And I was able to jump like totally back into it once I had come up to speed at my new job.
It's the beauty of open source communities. There's always work to jump back into. Nikita, what about you? I know this is something that you frequently both ask and answer questions about.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely asked you about it. I remember that. So there are a few things. So I don't have a set routine around open source work mostly, because sometimes I will, so open source is not technically as part of my day job. I usually do it after or before work. And so what I do usually is, so in the mornings I'll just go over my emails, and I also like go over the issues and the new PRs that have come in, like that have been created in the repos that I'm interested in. So, so like I'm involved in SIG contributor experience. So there are some SIG contributor experience related things that happen in test infra. So every morning or every evening, I'll just go over the test info repo and check if there are like any new issues or any new PRs, so that I can review, or I can just jump in, or I can understand what's going on, or just like figure out if there are any new changes happening in this area. That's also like one aspect which helps me in like keeping in touch with the fast part, because things do change fast sometimes. And the other thing that I do sometimes is I check the latest commits that have been added. So since I'm in India, most of like whenever I go to sleep, things start happening, and whenever I wake up, things have already happened. So I usually wake up to see, like, just check the recent commits that have merged to understand if there's something interesting or it's something that I want to learn more about. I'll go check out that, or I'll just like go and bookmark it and check it out later over the weekend or something. One more thing that I've done is in the past, and sometimes even now, is I usually add words as Slack keyword highlights. I don't know what's the right word for it. Like, you get a notification if someone mentions that word on Slack for things that I'm interested in. So I did that for CRDs when I was like changing the API, and it was like when CRDs were really, really new. And then suddenly everyone started using CRDs, and my notifications just blew up completely. So do that at your own risk. Make sure that you don't add too common like keywords that are too common. But that helps me like understand if someone's facing problems using that particular component or something. And I can answer their questions quickly, and it also like helps me find issues, and it has helped me find issues pretty quick before. So that's really helpful for me, honestly. And the other thing that I do is I also watch some repos on GitHub. So like, for example, I watch the community repo, the SIG release repo. I might not read all
Yikes.
the things that
Yikes.
come. Yeah, I know.
Yikes. Like, at least please say you've got filters and they're not going into your inbox.
Yeah, I use a lot of email filters. That is true.
All right.
Jeff, what's up?
Do you use the Thocken way of filters?
Yeah, a little bit more on top of that, but pretty much yes. So there's also this, if someone can like share the link on Slack, or I can do that after this. But we have recommended best practices for email filters document. So I pretty much follow that. So it kind of helps in, like, if you're interested in some repo, don't watch the Kubernetes repo, because your email quota will like blow up in a day. But if like community or SIG release or even enhancement is pretty crowded these days, but community or SIG releases are good repos to like watch, maybe. And that kind of like keeps me in touch with what's going on. I might not read everything, but I will just check the subject and do that. And so these email filters will also tell you like if someone's requested review on a PR, or someone's mentioned you, or they've assigned you. And I usually just like go through the assignee label first, and then the review comments and such. So if you assign me, you'll probably get a reply faster. And that's, I guess, pretty much it. I mean, I'll probably write code for a feature maybe 1 hour or 2 hours a day, depending if I have the energy to do that. If I don't, I'm just like throwing up my hands in the air and I'm done for the day. So I don't think it's kind of important to contribute every day, but just showing up whenever you can is good enough.
Yeah, on the topic of email, I find email and mailing lists to be a massive time sink that will fill all of your available time if you let them. So I guess I think these are like sort of above and beyond the best practices listed in that document. But one of the things I do, I don't subscribe at all to any emails for the SIG Google groups. I will check them like manually every so often, like say like usually like right before a SIG meeting. So maybe like once every 2 weeks kind of thing. And if they need me to respond or something like that, then I can request the message, but that's pretty rare. For like the Kubernetes dev mailing list, I will subscribe to a digest. So I get one email like maybe every few days, and it's got all of the updates in abridged form. So I don't have to look at every single thing, and I can see if I like care about that particular thread or not. So I get the highlights, but I don't have to like go and read 20 million things. On Slack, I mute a lot of channels. And then on GitHub, like I don't watch any repos. One of the nice things is if you do become a project member and you join a SIG, you will usually get added to a team somewhere, and that team owns a thing. And the bot will go and request your reviews on things. So you will get automatically notified if you need to go and look at a particular PR. You don't have to like actively necessarily set up some like monitoring or watch all of the things. You can also do some fancy filtering with labels. If you just want to like get notifications for your particular SIG, you can say like, yeah, I only want to see like these notifications in my inbox for like SIG instrumentation or something like that. Other things need not apply.
Awesome. Yeah, email is a beast, and so are GitHub notifications. So there is a no-win situation that we have going on right now. The win is pick one that works for you, because we will definitely try our hardest to over communicate in this project. We try. We might not always win with the over communication, but we definitely try. All right, so our last question in chat right now, the individual wanted to know, is there a diagram of all the SIGs and or governance structure? How do the SIGs interact in the decision-making processes? So we talked a little bit about KEPs, right? So that's like a decision-making process. I'm gonna show right now on my screen, and I'm gonna share some diagrams that we do have, but from y'all's perspectives, how do the SIGs interact with other SIGs, for instance, especially like, you know, we mentioned testing earlier. Talk to us a little bit about your experiences there. And then I'm gonna share my screen.
Yeah, I guess mostly I will like join their Slack channels, poke people, but frequently I find that like people aren't necessarily the most responsive on Slack, especially because a lot of these SIG channels, they just get a lot of like sort of drive-by newbie questions, and people aren't necessarily paying attention to those. Or, you know, people don't happen to be around when you ask a question, then a bunch of other people talk, and then there's like some scroll back and nobody actually ends up addressing your thing. The best way that I've found to interact with other SIGs has been to show up to their SIG meetings, because that way, you know, you get like an immediate response, and also they like see your face, they know that you exist, and maybe you even get something in their meeting notes so that like everybody else in the community can be aware of it. I guess if you wanted something a little bit more formal and like a record of note, you could go and email the Google group specifically as well. That's mostly what I've been doing. I guess I haven't actually, like for this one particular thing, try to chase down someone from SIG testing. It's been like, okay, these are the approvers for this particular file. Like, let me ping the one that I think is going to be most familiar with this. And if I don't know, I'll go ask somebody who would know. Try to get a hold of them, and then they're like, oh, I think this other person should look at this. And then it's a matter of trying to get a hold of that person. And, you know, okay, they haven't like, even though they're assigned, they haven't looked at this and this has been a week. Well, maybe I'll go poke somebody that I know who works at the same employer as them, so they can go like ping them internally and see if they can get their feedback. That sort of thing.
That's awesome. Nikita, how do you interact with other SIGs, and how does that play in, and how do you find out, actually, this is like a loaded question, how do you find out what their decision-making process is? Is there a document, perhaps? Like a, starts with a C word, charter.
Oh yeah. So all SIGs also have this thing called a charter that you can find in the community repo. So there are lots of directories, and each SIG directory will have something called as a charter. So that also mentions how the SIG makes decisions. Usually, or also like who can approve certain changes. It's usually the chairs or the technical leads, but sometimes they can like define certain individuals as well. As far as interaction between SIGs go, like Ilana said, I think meetings are actually the easiest way to show up and talk about whatever you want to talk about. I usually don't do that many meetings because of like the time zones and everything. So I usually stick to Slack. I will ping people until they respond to me. And
You can get other people to show up to meetings for you too. That's something that like sometimes meetings are at an inconvenient time. And so I'll be like, hey, you know, other person in SIG instrumentation, can you go present the case on this to like cloud provider because I'm busy, or it's not at a convenient time or something like that. And that's often pretty effective too.
That's definitely true.
Yes, the delegate. Hey, go advocate my thing right now. All right, so that really wraps us up right now. But I always like I'm trying to end with the same type of question, which is, if you knew one thing about upstream Kubernetes when you started, it could be like something about your dev environment. It could be something about like a SIG meeting. Like, what's one thing you wish you knew when you started that you didn't know until like later on down the road? Trick question. I actually, you know what I hear a lot about? I always hear, I didn't know certain things in the community repo existed, like the developer documentation. Or I didn't know that this Slack channel was a thing. Anything along those lines? Or the contributor ladder. I feel like.
Oh yeah, I didn't know how to become a member.
Yeah, there you go. That's perfect.
It was really weird. Like this is definitely not my first open source rodeo. So I like, it didn't even occur to me like that I should apply to become a project member, or that the barrier to entry there was really low. Like you only need to have a couple of PRs merged or be a little bit active in the project to become a member. The bar is higher for, you know, reviewer and approver and that kind of thing. But yeah, that was just, I was like, nobody told me. And then I saw Amy tweet about it, and I was like, oh, maybe I should do that. And then I did, and it was like literally approved 24 hours later. So.
What are some of the benefits that you see now versus like that now that you're a member versus not? What are some things that like have helped you there?
I mean, the biggest benefit is I can tell the bot to stop marking my issues as stale. That was really annoying because I'd have to go ping someone and be like, can you so I need to now I can be like lifecycle frozen, stop killing my issue. I can LGTM PRs. I don't need an OK to test on my PRs. There are all sorts of like small benefits. And I have the fancy Kubernetes badge on my GitHub profile.
Yes, I said holla with mute. And I was like, Nikita, your last tip, and then we're out.
I'd actually +1 to that. So when I applied for membership, I had like 2 design proposals merged. I had like shipped 2 API changes and everything, but I was really not sure if I was worthy of becoming a member. And when I was being added to an owner's file, at that time I was like, hey, wait a sec, I'm not a member yet. You can't add me. And they're like, are you crazy? How are you not a member already? So that's when I became a member. I think we could obviously make it less intimidating to like in our membership document about applying for membership. So yeah, that's one thing. And also, like, if you are reviewing code in some component, and if you think you should be a reviewer, reach out to the approvers and let them know that you're interested to be one, and chances are they'll be pretty okay with you being added in there, which I was also pretty shy about. I'm still pretty shy about, and I'm still learning how to go about that. But I think that's something that everyone can use.
Even a top contributor gets shy, y'all.
You don't need to have like 2 caps and like 6 PRs and all that merge.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Really,
yeah.
not.
No, you don't. No. Yes. And if you would like a better experience with the bots, this is for you. All right. That wraps things up. You all have been awesome. The information that you have provided here is so valuable for so many people. We really appreciate it. We are here same time next month with different panelists. potentially different YouTube streamers. So everybody wave, and Jeff, take us out of here. Thanks so much, everybody. See you soon.